On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really strong, 1 being not so strong, how would you rate yourself when it comes to you being able to really embrace change in your life, to actually go through a process to where you come out on the other side of that process and you've actually changed something for the better in your world or from within yourself? What's your number? Whatever that number is, there's no right or wrong answer, of course, but there is an answer. And this is something that's incredibly important for us to check in with ourselves on a regular basis. Why? Because you and I are divinely meant to be changing. Change is to be a constant in our world. Change is to be something that we are to be embracing as a lifestyle. In fact, the only way we can grow as a human being, the only way we can grow as a man, as a woman, as a leader, as a parent, as a husband, as a wife, whatever it is that we are expressing ourselves as in our lives, the only way we can grow is through this process or this dynamic called change. I wrote a book on being called to change. The reason why I wrote this book is because throughout the years, all the people that I've had the pleasure of working with, in the thousands that would be, that I've discovered something absolutely amazing. And here's what it is most people resist change like the plague. They don't like it, they're afraid of it, they run away from it, they come up with all kinds of creative ways on how to avoid it. What I discovered in this process of working with a number of people, and by the way, also including myself, is that change will come knocking on our doorstep. It always does. The question becomes, can you recognize it when it's knocking? And if you can, what do you do next? Do you embrace it, or might you resist it or avoid it? One of the things that I dive into fairly deeply in the book, Being Called to Change, is the two voices that reside within us. Voice number 1 is the ego. Voice number 2 is the soul. Not necessarily in that order, of course. Between these two voices, there's like a battle going on. This battle is between the soul self and or the ego self. Now, what's interesting when it comes to change, the ego does not like change. In fact, the ego will do anything and everything it knows how to do to get us to resist change and stay in that state of resisting change. Whereas the soul, as in your soul, likes change. Your soul will do everything it knows how to do to get you to welcome change, to invite change, to recognize change, and ultimately to embrace it. Why? Because the soul is here to grow. The soul is here to evolve. The soul is here to expand itself. The ego, on the other hand, likes to maintain status quo. In fact, to the point where in some cases the ego becomes addicted to status quo, keeping everything just nice and put, so to speak. In fact, the ego loves to play it safe. The ego loves to play it small in its own world. The ego can be incredibly controlling. The ego in itself is quite interesting once you start to conduct your own study about it, because as you do, you begin to discover all these different characteristics of your own ego and how your ego plays and how your ego can trick you and how your ego can influence you when it comes time to making choices, and more importantly, the significant choices, the big choices, the type of choices or decisions that you and I make, that once those decisions are made, we go down that pathway, whatever that pathway is. That pathway could be into a relationship, perhaps with the wrong person, or maybe to launch a business, but it's the wrong business. Or maybe it's to launch into a strategy that we're going to use to grow our business, but it happens to be the wrong strategy. Whatever it is, that would be the work of the ego. The work of the soul, of course, and its influence is always to take us down a path, or to at least influence us to make the type of choices, to make the type of decisions that cause us to go onward and upward along our journeys. Well, in my book, Being Called to Change, I dive very deeply into this subject called change. Why do we resist it? How do we really recognize it? How do we better embrace it? And all the way through, as I said in the opening, to get to the point where you can start to see the change that actually has occurred from within you somewhere, somehow in your life. That might be all of a sudden there was an old behavioral pattern that you were completely committed to, and now all of a sudden, not only is that old behavioral pattern gone, has it dissolved, but there's a new behavioral pattern that you're able to recognize because you're showing up differently in your life, and in some cases, perhaps around the exact same situation that's played out 20 times over, and now you're on the 21st round, so to speak, and you notice that you are literally showing up differently in that same scenario, in that same situation. That's the power of change. That's the transformative power of change. Now, ultimately, where are we going with change? In my view, and in my world, and everything that I've experienced at this point in time when it comes to this powerful dynamic called change, it's for this reason, and that is for us to move towards the better version of ourselves. So if we're a parent, we're to be moving towards becoming a better parent. If we're a business owner, we're to be moving towards becoming a better business owner, or a better leader, or a better wife, or a better whatever. There's a better version. And in my book, I will break this down as well, where I will help you to see this pathway. In fact, what the book will do, it'll help to illuminate that pathway for you so you can better recognize what it is that you really are to be moving towards, what it is that your soul has perhaps been influencing you, guiding you, supporting you to move in this direction. And by just simply reading my book, all of a sudden, it's like somebody turns the light on and you see again, you see exactly the direction that you're to be moving in as you're moving towards the better you, or the best self that you could possibly manifest in this time that you find yourself in. I highly recommend you get a copy of this book. I believe this book has the potential to change your life starting right now. That's how powerful it is. I've been working at this, like I said, for many years, actually decades now. I do know a lot about this subject. I've helped a lot of people change things that when they entered into my life, they were absolutely convinced that there's no way they could ever change this, and yet they did. Oh, and by the way, I'm my own testimony because the way I am today is so different than that of how I was just 5 short years ago, let alone 20 years ago. I've gone through so many changes. In fact, I believe one of the reasons why I'm so skilled at teaching people how to embrace change in their life is for this reason, because I did turn my life into its own laboratory, if you will, where I became my own study. And through my own pain, through my own uncomfortable moments, through my own challenging times, somehow, some way, I began to discover these truths, this powerful principle called change, and more importantly, how to integrate it into my day-to-day world so that not only could I change, but I would change again, and I would change again, and I would change again. And next thing you know, I was becoming my better self. I was becoming the larger version of me, which is possible for each and every one of us. Lastly, I'll say this about what it is that I teach, or what it is that you'll learn about in this book. I dive pretty deeply into this subject called unconscious resistance. It's one of the greatest tricks of the ego. In fact, if we stay in unconscious resistance, that in itself is us feeding up or powering up, as I often say, the ego self. The ego loves the resistance because as long as the resistance is there, the ego will get its way with us, which is to maintain status quo. In other words, there will be no forward movement in our world. And so this is a biggie. This is a biggie. I teach this a lot in my classes, all of my classes, because I see it all over. I've dealt with it myself over and over again throughout the years. If there's one piece that has clearly been the game changer in my world, this is it. Learning how to recognize unconscious resistance when it shows itself, and then more importantly, how to clear it. Again, another dynamic that you'll learn a lot about in my book, Being Called to Change. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen here today. I hope you check out my book, and more importantly, I hope you get a copy of my book and you start reading it so you can start to implement the ideas, the strategies, the principles, and the universal laws that I offer in my book. Thanks again for listening.
Available wherever books are sold.